If you told a Linux gamer from 2015 that in 2026, installing a game on Linux would be easier than installing the same game on Windows, they would have laughed. The idea was so far from the reality of Linux gaming at that time that it was not even a serious proposition. Linux gaming in 2015 was a project for enthusiasts. You had to configure Wine manually, track down compatibility patches, troubleshoot graphics driver issues, and accept that most of your library would simply not run. Installing a game on Linux in 2015 was a research expedition. Installing the same game on Windows was trivial by comparison. 11 years later, the relationship has inverted. For a growing category of games, the installation experience on Linux is genuinely smoother, faster, and less friction-heavy than the equivalent experience on Windows. The inversion is not universal. Some games are still easier on Windows, but the trend line is clear in the specific cases where Linux has become the easier platform are more common than most users outside the Linux gaming community realize. I want to walk you through what has changed, why Linux installation is now easier in specific cases, and what the experience actually looks like if you make the switch. Let me start by describing what the installation experience is on modern Linux. For a Steam game, the installation process on Linux is, in most cases, identical to the installation process on Windows. You launch Steam, you find the game you want, you click Install. Steam downloads the game and sets it up, you launch it, it runs. The entire process is the same on both platforms. What is different is what happens behind the scenes on Linux. Steam's Proton layer handles any compatibility translation the game needs, which happens automatically, invisibly, and without requiring the user to do anything. The user experience is the same. The underlying mechanism on Linux is more complex, but the complexity is hidden from the user. For a non-Steam game, the installation process varies. If the game is available through Lutris, which is a Linux native game management tool, the installation is typically one click. Lutris maintains installation scripts that handle the download, configuration, and setup of the game, with the user's involvement limited to selecting the game and waiting. If the game is not in Lutris, the installation may require more manual steps. But the tools available in 2026, including Bottles for managing Wine environments and Heroic Games Launcher for Epic Games Store and Goji titles, make most non-Steam installations tractable. Compare this to Windows. The Windows installation process for a Steam game is the same because Steam is cross-platform. The Windows installation process for a game purchased directly from a publisher often involves a downloaded installer, anti-malware scan, administrator permission prompt, installation to program files, registry entries, and various other steps that are largely invisible to the user, but that add up to a more complex process than the Linux equivalent. Some Windows installations trigger additional software installs, including specific Visual C++ runtimes, DirectX runtimes, and Microsoft-specific components. The Linux equivalents for these runtimes are typically handled by the compatibility layer and do not require separate installations. For specific Windows processes, the friction is higher than the Linux equivalent. Installing a game from a physical medium, which still happens for some specialty titles, requires disk handling on Windows, and is often simpler with a downloaded Linux installation. Installing a game that requires Microsoft account authentication adds steps on Windows that are not required on Linux if the game is available through Steam. Installing a game that has been locked to a specific publisher's launcher requires the launcher on both platforms, but on Linux, the launcher is often integrated into Heroic or Lutris in ways that reduce the overhead of managing multiple launchers. The specific mechanisms that make Linux installation simple in 2026 are several. Proton, Valve's compatibility layer, handles most of the complexity of running Windows games on Linux. The user does not need to configure anything. Proton selects the appropriate version, sets up the environment, and launches the game. The years of engineering effort that have gone into Proton mean that most Steam games at this point work with no more user intervention than clicking install. Lutris, Bottles, and Heroic Games Launcher, the three main tools for non-Steam games on Linux, have been refined to the point where they handle the complexity of Wine configuration automatically. The user selects a game, and the tools handle the rest. The installation scripts that these tools maintain cover a wide range of games, and the scripts are updated as games are patched or as Wine is updated. The graphics driver situation on Linux, which was historically a source of friction, has been largely resolved. AMD graphics work well out of the box on most distributions. NVIDIA graphics, which were previously a pain point, are now handled cleanly by most gaming-focused distributions, with a proprietary driver installed and configured automatically. Intel graphics have always worked well on Linux. The distribution landscape has consolidated around a few gaming-focused options that work well out of the box. Pop! OS has been gaming-friendly for years. Nobara, which is a Fedora-based distribution specifically tuned for gaming, ships with gaming optimizations pre-applied. KakiOS provides performance-focused options. Bazzite is an immutable distribution designed for gaming. Any of these distributions, installed fresh, provides a gaming-ready environment with minimal configuration. The specific games that are easiest on Linux compared to Windows tend to fall into several categories. Indie games, which are often distributed through Steam and have minimal anti-cheat requirements, generally install with zero friction. Older games, which sometimes have compatibility issues on modern Windows due to deprecated APIs, often work better through Proton on Linux than on modern Windows natively. Games with native Linux support, which is a growing category, work without any compatibility layer at all. Games that are primarily single-player and do not depend on kernel-level anti-cheat or invasive DRM tend to install and run cleanly on Linux. Games that are still easier on Windows, or that require Windows for specific reasons, also exist. Competitive multiplayer games with kernel-level anti-cheat often do not work on Linux. Some games with specific copy protection schemes cannot be made to work through Wine. Some very new 8A releases may have compatibility issues in the first days or weeks after release, before the Proton team has had time to address them. Users who primarily play games in these categories may find Linux less convenient. For users who are considering whether Linux gaming is for them, the practical evaluation is straightforward. Make a list of the games you play most. Check each game on ProtonDB, which is a user-maintained database of Linux compatibility for Steam games. For each game, ProtonDB gives a rating ranging from broken to platinum, with most modern games falling at gold or platinum, meaning they work with minimal or no issues. If most of your list is gold or platinum, Linux gaming is viable for you. If your list has many broken entries, Linux gaming has specific gaps that may affect you. For users who decide to make the switch, the setup process is also straightforward. Choose a gaming-focused distribution. Install it. Install Steam. Configure Proton. Install Lutris and Heroic for non-Steam games. The entire process takes a few hours, including the operating system installation. After that, the experience of installing and playing games is, for most of the games, users care about as smooth as or smoother than the Windows equivalent. The broader observation I want to make is that the reversal I described, where Linux installation is easier than Windows installation for many cases, is the result of sustained engineering effort by a community that most Windows users do not know exists. Valve's investment in Proton has been substantial. The Lutris, Bottles, and Heroic projects have been built by open source contributors. The graphics driver work by AMD, and increasingly by NVIDIA, has closed a long-standing gap. The cumulative effect is that Linux gaming has transformed from enthusiast project to viable daily driver for a substantial fraction of the gaming population. The fact that this transformation is not widely known outside the Linux community is a marketing failure of the ecosystem. The tools are good, the experience is polished, the compatibility is strong. The users who would benefit often do not know. Part of the reason for this gap is that the Linux community is disproportionately focused on technical users who are comfortable evaluating the tools themselves, and the marketing skills that would reach less technical users are not as well developed. Part of the reason is that the companies with the resources to market Linux gaming, like Valve, have incentives that do not require them to market aggressively. Valve benefits from Steam customers, regardless of what operating system they use, and does not need to convert Windows users to Linux to sell them games. For users who are reading or listening to this, the practical takeaway is that Linux gaming in 2026 is not what you remember from earlier attempts. If you tried Linux gaming 5 or 10 years ago and found it frustrating, the current experience is dramatically different. If you have never tried Linux gaming, the entry point is lower than it has ever been. The specific decision of whether to make the switch depends on the specific games you play, but the threshold for making the switch has dropped substantially. Subscribe for the next video, which is a step-by-step walkthrough of setting up a fresh Linux gaming system from distribution selection through Steam installation through first game launch. The video covers the specific tools, the specific settings, and the specific troubleshooting for the cases where something does not work on the first try. And in the comments, tell me which game you would check first on ProtonDB if you were considering a switch. The answer to that question reveals what matters most to you, and the ProtonDB rating for that game will tell you whether Linux gaming is ready to serve you. Word count, 2648.